Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us for our Richmond Highway Improvements Town Hall. Um, so we're just going to go ahead and get started. If you've joined us before, you know Matt Renninger. He is usually the one running the show. My name is Kaylee. I am Supervisor Lusk's Communications Manager. Um, and so just bear with me while I go ahead and try and fill Matt's shoes. Um, just a quick things before we get started today. You'll know this if you've joined our crowdcasts before. If you have questions during the presentations, please go ahead and use the Ask a Questions feature in the bottom, not the chat section. I will not be paying attention to that as much. So just to make sure that we get to your question, please write it out on the Ask a Question section. If you're not using Chrome, use Chrome. If you get kicked out or have technical difficulties, please try and use Chrome. It makes things go smoother on Crowdcast. Other than that, you can ask your questions on video. So when I pull you, if you can ask questions without video, but if you would like to be brought up with video, please make sure that you're muted as soon as you get connected, and also use headphones if you have them. You don't need video and audio to ask the questions. Just write them in the Ask a Question part below. I'll go ahead and send you an invitation when it's time for the question and answer section. And if you don't have the video, just just indicate on your question and I'll ask for you. Other than that, I think that is all for now. So I'll just go ahead and invite Supervisor Lusk to make some quick remarks, and then we'll start on the presentations.
Okay, thank you very much, Kaylee. I'll start by thanking the staff from the Virginia Department of Transportation, as well as the staff from the Fairfax County Department of Transportation for participating this evening. This is an opportunity for everyone here in the southern part of Fairfax to learn more about the projects that we have proposed along the Richmond Highway corridor, so specifically the widening of Richmond Highway and also the BRT project here. These are going to be extremely transformational projects for our area, and we are excited about the opportunity to see them come to fruition. And we recognize that the importance they're going to play as it relates to the redevelopment of the corridor and helping us achieve the objectives that have been set in the comprehensive plan. So tonight we'll again have the presentations from staff, and we'll also have an opportunity for any of you who have questions to be able to answer those questions, or excuse me, ask those questions and receive answers. And then you'll also have an opportunity, if you have questions specifically for me, I'll be here as well. So just wanted to get us kicked off and look forward to the presentations and the discussion that will follow. So thank you very much. Kaylee, you're on mute. You're on mute.
Okay, sorry guys.
Yep.
So I'm just going to go ahead and let Dan get started here with your presentation. So whenever you're ready, go ahead, Dan.
All right, thank you to Supervisor Lusk and his staff for setting this up. We look forward to providing some useful information about the Richmond Highway project. So my name is Dan Reinhardt. I'm with VDOT. I'm the project manager for the Richmond Highway corridor improvements. And today we want to go over a quick project overview for anyone who hasn't been engaged in the project to date. We want to go over some design updates since the last time we met at the design public hearing last year. We want to go through some design changes that have occurred since the last public meeting. And then we'll go through some schedule and estimate. And then I think we'll have questions at the end of all the presentations. So the Richmond Highway Corridor Improvements is a 3-mile long section of highway widening between Jeff Todd Way and Sherwood Hall Lane. It is one of several initiatives along the corridor. There's actually the Embark Comprehensive Plan Amendment, which set the vision for Richmond Highway Corridor, the multimodal vision for the corridor. There's the BRT project that will be presented next, which extends from Huntington Metro down to Fort Belvoir. And then in the middle, there's the highway widening that's being administered by VDOT from Jeff Todd Way to Sherwood Hall Lane. This project includes safety improvements, things like crosswalks at all the signalized intersections, includes congestion relief through operations, as well as the addition of a lane in each direction, going from 4 lanes to 6 lanes. It includes intersection improvements, things like realignment of Sacramento Drive to line up with Cooper, realignment of Buckman Road, the skewed intersection of Buckman Road near the Government Center to align with Mohawk Lane. It includes median reservation for BRT to come through and put in the BRT lanes in the future. It also includes separate sidewalks and cycle tracks on each side of the roadway. We're including 3 bridge replacements, potential noise walls, overhead utility relocations, and stormwater management facilities throughout the corridor. So it was March 2019 that we had a design public hearing at Mount Vernon High School. Since then, we've developed written responses to all the comments that we got at the design public hearing. So thank you for anybody who submitted a comment. We've incorporated minor design adjustments from all the comments that we received from the public, as well as some internal comments. We have been out meeting with property owners. This is a time for me to give a plug. If you have not had us out for a meeting and you're a member of an HOA or a civic group and would like to have us come out and give a presentation, please get a hold of me, and we were happy to do that. We have been working on right-of-way plans for full property acquisitions, as well as conducting title research to lead up to notice to proceed on our right-of-way acquisition process. And we've been advancing the plans from the 30% level to roughly the 75% level. So there's a couple design changes I want to highlight for you tonight. The first is one of the major comments we got at design public hearing was that single direction cycle tracks, one southern direction on the west side of the road and one northern direction on the east side of the road, was not sufficient, particularly if you were making short trips on a bicycle, like going to the grocery store. So we have incorporated that comment into the plans. So we now have one 8-foot cycle track on either side of the roadway that will be bidirectional. Another change is in trying to realize the vision of the Embark Comprehensive Plan Amendment. We had 8-foot amenity or buffer strips behind the curb on each side at the design public hearing. We've expanded those to 9 feet to allow for larger trees to be planted along the roadway in conformance with that Embark vision. I want to talk about some schedule revisions that have occurred since the last design public meeting. The project is roughly 1 year behind schedule as of right now. One of the major factors is we were anticipating receiving a finding of no significant impact last year. That did not happen, and that has been delayed, and that has impacted the rest of the schedule, particularly the start of the right-of-way process. So that's put us a little bit behind. Going forward, as we've advanced the plans, we've looked at the right-of-way and utility relocations. What we showed at design public hearing was a high-level assessment of the parcels that were being impacted, and we based that on judgment. We had 3.5 years allocated in the schedule for right-of-way and utility relocations. We have taken another look at that based on the additional information of advancing the plans to 75%. as well as some of the detail that's involved in some of these properties. And we've determined that 3.5 years just was not adequate. And it's going to take roughly 6 years for right-of-way and utility relocations to be completed if we proceed in the manner that we had originally proposed at the design public hearing. So that was not something that we were excited about. So we took another look at ways that we could recover the schedule. So at design public hearing, the schedule is linear. We do the design to a certain point, then we start the right-of-way. We have to complete right-of-way before we start utilities. We have to complete utilities before we start construction. And that is the way the federal process works. We do need to follow those steps. But we lose a lot of time in a 3-mile roadway with not being able to work some of those steps in parallel. So we looked at an option of phasing the project, which allows us to utilize that 3-mile project length to have different activities going at the same time. So we have come up with a 2-phase strategy that allows for some of those tasks to be completed in parallel. So with that, we're able to realize construction 18 months sooner than we would if we had just allowed the delay in a linear schedule fashion, and allows us to complete the construction 12 months sooner than we would have if we just proceeded with the original schedule strategy. So these are the 2 phases that the project will be broken into. Phase 1 is from Jeff Todd Way to just north of Fry Road. Phase 2 is from just north of Fry Road to Sherwood Hall Lane. They're both approximately 1.5 miles. You can see down at the bottom the parcels impacted in Phase 1. There's 81, and there's 117 parcels impacted in Phase 2. And so that, when we say impacted, that's some sort of right-of-way acquisition, whether it be permanent fee or temporary or permanent easement or just temporary construction easements. So this is what the 2-phase schedule looks like as we move forward. So the dark blue bars are design stages. The brown bars are right-of-way phases. Light blue is the brown is total take parcels in the right-of-way phase. Light blue is also right-of-way phase. Red is utilities, and orange is construction. So it all stems from being able to obtain that finding of no significant impact from Federal Highway Administration, which is the FONSI shown at the top. Once we've acquired that FONSI, we are able to begin right-of-way acquisition. We will start with full acquisitions, and then in parallel to full acquisitions, we will be doing advancing the plans to include utility relocations. Once we've identified all the easements needed for utility relocations, we will show those on right-of-way plans, and then we will be able to request from Federal Highway Administration authorization to move into total or partial takes. And that's where this schedule really starts to show the advantages. So for phase 1 in mid-2021, we're going to start the blue bar of partial acquisitions. And then at the end of that, or near the end of that, we're going to have an 18-month period of utility relocations. That blue bar needs to complete before the 18-month period for utility relocations begins. And so you can see that we are still working in phase 1 on the light blue bar on partial acquisitions while we're working on partial acquisitions in phase 2. But it allows us to move forward with utility relocations without waiting until early mid-2025 to complete all of the partial property acquisitions. We do need to complete utilities before we can begin construction. So again, there's an advantage here where phase 2 utilities are still being relocated, where we can begin construction on phase 1 earlier. So those are some of the advantages we see in the two-phase schedule. So right now we're looking at construction starting in phase 1 in 2025 and completing in mid-2027. And around the beginning of 2027, beginning construction in phase 2 and ending roughly at the end of 2028. And again, the advantage of this two-phase approach is we're able to begin to start construction 18 months earlier than if we had not taken a two-phased approach, and we're able to end it 12 months sooner as well. I quickly want to give an update. We're currently working on an estimate based on the 75% plans. We hope to have that wrapped up shortly. Right now, the estimate is $372 million. We have $220 million programmed for the project. That leaves a shortfall of $151.2 million. There are several applications out to close this funding gap, one of which is an application with MBTA for $128 million that has been recommended at this point but not adopted at this time. So if you'd like more information on the Richmond Highway Corridor improvements, I've thrown the website up there. You can also do a Google search for Richmond Highway Corridor improvements, and that brings up our website. And I will turn it back to Supervisor Watts.
Thank you so much, Dan, and thank you for putting this together so quickly. And just a reminder for anyone that joined after we started, put your questions in the Ask a Question section at the bottom of your screen, and then we will go ahead and get into the question and answer portion of this presentation towards the end after the Fairfax County Department of Transportation does their presentation. So thanks so much, Dan. We're going to go ahead and invite Vanessa and Rick from Fairfax County Department of Transportation to start the presentation. Hi, Vanessa, and then Rick Foley.
Great. While we wait for Ricky, I will pull up my presentation and start sharing.
And thanks again, everybody, for putting this together. I know it was short notice, but okay, so we have Rick and Vanessa. I'll just go ahead and give you guys the floor.
Thanks, Kelly. It's telling me that there's too many video sources. Should I maybe if I turned off my video, oh, there we go. Let me try one more time. Oops. Apologies.
Yep, I see it now.
All right, perfect. Okay, so Dan did a great job of setting his up, and we were gonna kind of start not from scratch, but just kind of give you a project status. But before I even do that, for some of you who don't know about BRT, I wanted to take a minute and just kind of tell you about BRT. So this project is going from the Huntington Metro Station, you can see here on the diagram towards your right, all the way down to Fort Belvoir, and that's a total of about 7.4 miles. You can see we're looking at it in two sections. Section 1, we're going from Huntington Metro under original status to Hybla Valley, and then the Section 2 is supposed to go from Hybla Valley to Fort Belvoir. And you can see the little red dots along here. Those are our 9 anticipated stations going through the corridor. Since we're not going to start from, this project, we kicked it off in late 2015, 2016. We're not going to start from from really there, but give you more of a project status. I do have the website here at the bottom. If you just go to their fairfaxcounty.gov website and you put in Richmond Highway BRT, all our past presentations, materials, community meetings, materials that we have are all posted there. So for additional background, please feel free to go back there and stop it and kind of learn more about the project. For today's discussion, though, we're going to talk about, again, just project status, where we are, what we've been doing for the last couple of months and years since we last went to the community in September of 2019. We're going to talk about a schedule refinement, and then Ricky Foley from our real estate specialist will have a discussion on right-of-way process and acquisition. So let me move the slides forward. One second. Okay, apologies about that. Let's try this. So where we are with funding, we are going after a Federal Transit Administration grant and under their capital investment grant program known as New Starts. So we are very proud and pleased to announce that we are officially into the first phase of that project development or that grant application. So you can see here our application was accepted for this first phase of, again, called project development, March 13th of 2020. And we do have a timeline that we need to meet. So there is 15 to 16 things, the most important being we finish our environmental document, finish our preliminary engineering and our management plans, and that all has to be done within a 2-year window. I just mentioned our environmental documentation. So currently we're a categorical exclusion. You can see here we've been working and we're hoping to close that out sometime this late summer, early fall. So you can see here we're during our anticipating a final submission for FTA review, and then hopefully finding a signature from FTA to close that document out in sometime in September of this year. We get questions about where we are with funding. So you can see here, right now, our anticipated cost for the project is approximately $730 million. We're a little bit over halfway there with various funding sources. The latest being one from SmartScale last year that we were awarded $50 million. You can see here to the right, we have a little bit to go with a future NVTA application of about $70 million. But again, the bulk of that is really to come from the Federal Transit Administration's New Start program for $288 million. Where we are with public involvement, we do have a email blaster list that we do for anything related to the project. We did send out a newsletter on April 1st of this year, and with given the health situation, we were planning to have a March-April timeframe meeting to talk about just everything that's going on Richmond Highway. So that was going to include BRT, the VDOT Widening Project, and our Department of Planning and Development's urban design guidelines. But since that situation, we have deferred that meeting. But now we're just looking at different ways of other opportunities for virtual meetings. So whether we do something like this or a live or recorded presentation, we're looking to do something maybe in late July, and depending again on the health situation, potentially have a meeting of in-person meeting sometime early this fall. Where we are with project status, we have made some updates. The first one being phasing. If you caught on earlier when I was talking about sections, originally the BRT project was supposed to be from Huntington Metro to Hybla Valley, but since then—
Hey, Vanessa?
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but
No,
could you make the screens full screen? I think the audience is having a little bit of a harder time. Or, yep. So just go.
I could try. Yeah, is that better? When full screen, it wasn't letting me change the.
Will it let you go into presentation mode?
It got stuck last time, but I can try it again. Now it works.
Yep.
Okay, let's try that one more time. Okay, so yeah, no problem. So again, we were talking about sections, and originally through our phasing or sections, we were stopping section 1 at Hybla Valley. But since then, you can see here, we would have this little no man's land. So we've extended this section. So now section 1 goes all the way from Huntington to Gum Springs. You can see the cutoff here from the yellow to the blue, and then section 2 would go from Gum Springs to Fort Belvoir. On design progress, we're hoping to have some updated role plans in late July that we'll be posting to our website. So some of that will include updates, design updates, feedback that we've gotten from the community. And of course, we continue to refine design, but we do want to post it and give everybody an update to where we are. We do anticipate completing 30% design plans in late summer. And so when I see roll plots, you can see at the bottom right, this graphic, that's what they'll look like. So you can kind of get a better understanding of how the BRT lanes, where they lay out, where sidewalks are, and the cycle tracks. The other note that we shared with the community back in April when we put our newsletter out is that the final decision for the Hybla Valley Station, if some of you that have followed the project, we were looking at different alternatives. I think we had 4 total. The decision has been made to go with option B, which you can see this graphic to the right. That's so Fortson Road will remain open and operate as it does today with full access. And you can see here both BRT station platforms. The south platform will be just to the south of Fortson Road, and then the northbound platform will be to the north of Boswell. You got stuck. Okay, so now we want to take a minute and talk a little bit about schedule refinement. And this year, earlier in May, we did our first major rebaseline since our DRPT study. So what that meant is that just given decisions, whether it be about project delivery, more information.
Vanessa,
Yep.
we can't see the screen again.
Sorry. Try that one more time. So I know some people were having a hard time, but it freezes on me. Is this a little better?
No, now it's showing up in your picture window, not on the main screen. There you go. That's better.
That's
now,
better.
If you can make it large again.
I'm sorry, one more time. You need to make it.
Can you make it full screen again?
It gets stuck. That's it freezes on me, but we can try it again. Okay. So schedule refinement. So in May, earlier this year, May 2020, we did our first major rebaseline. So getting information, survey information, just information we have now additional to the quarter. What it did is it gave us the opportunity to reflect some of the decisions that we've made about project delivery, right-of-way needs, and of course, the relationship to the VDOT project. And this was prior to their latest schedule, 2020. So we just, again, depending on activities, durations, dependencies, Dan spoke a little bit about that. We have to move utilities in order to continue with right-of-way. So we had a significantly more detail on that and than we did prior before. So that's what we had took a minute to do schedule refinement. So going forward, our schedule will of course be regularly updated to reflect other things that are going on in the quarter. So just coordination with adjacent projects. So the VDOT widening, the Huntington WMATA retro mill redevelopment that's doing. We also have to consider external events. So some of that could include FTA funding and of course scope modifications, if any. So just to start at the same page, for those of you who've been following the project, we do have a legacy schedule. So a high level, when we first started the project with construction for section 1, we thought we could open up by the end of 2026, and then section 2 in 2028. Again, based on the DRPT study that came out in I think was finalized in 2015. So since then, what has changed? What other factors have contributed to this change? And that's what we'll be going through right now. So one of the biggest ones is NEPA. There was unanticipated time for federally mandated consultation process. If you remember, I want to say back in 2017, maybe it was 2018, the federal government did shut down for a month or so. And so that did push us back in all our review processes. We talked about utilities. We know more now, so we need to allocate additional time for utility relocation. So that includes Dominion, Cox, Verizon, AT&T, As you know, the corridor is very old, so a lot of those utilities are the same, and so we just need a lot more time to coordinate that. Significant undergrounding we found that especially in the northern part of the corridor on the Boswell Avenue, North Kings Highway area, there's significant more telecommunications in the area that we need that we now know about. An additional too is a large gravity sewer line that requires a more complex design for the corridor is needed. Apologies, I'm having trouble again. I'm gonna have to restart this. Give me a second. Okay, another major design or design changes are contributing to the changes. We've had an additional 12 months to really look at development. So whether that be us going back and minimizing to reduce impacts on sensitive resources, so that it could include Collard Street, Groveton Baptist Church, historic fire station, and these are just to name a few. There's various others along the corridor. We've also again the Fortson Road intersection is another one that we've had to take a look at, in all good information based on public input. Accommodation of the embarked landscaping, Dan alluded to this a little bit, but just making certain changes of the cross section on the side to make sure we can get the full vision, which includes big trees along the corridor. We are also looking to light the whole corridor, so that's taken some more of our time. And absolutely, you can see here at the bottom also an enhanced stormwater management approach. So while we know we need to handle stormwater, we want to do that in a way that it becomes an amenity to the community. The two last ones that we're going to talk about is right-of-way. So design development, it resulted in just changes to property impacts that were not anticipated. And then to minimize the risk, the thing that we've been doing, and we can talk a little bit more about this under Ricky's presentation, is just shifting the partial acquisitions to a contractor. This project right now is going to be design build. So full acquisitions, while they will see with the county, partial acquisitions to further the design would be done down the line. Construction sequencing, we touched a little bit about this. So activity durations and dependencies. So we need to finish one activity before we start the next. So in this case, finishing right away before we can move to utilities and finally to construction. So that kind of just elongates the overall sequencing. And so that resulted in a more realistic total schedule and durations for all the milestones that we need to meet. So what does this do for the overall schedule? Hopefully you can see it here. We're about to finish our environmental review, which we just talked about. So this is where the pink is. I won't go through right away, as Ricky's going to do that a little bit more in time. But overall, what does that do to actually deliver the project? We're being extended to 2030 for a time frame of when we think we can deliver. I'd also note that we have section 2 under here. And we still need to go back and do look at the refinement for under the VDOT schedule. As you know, they just shared their new schedule with us, but we haven't had time to go back and really look at that to see how that's going to impact our project. But previously, we thought that the whole project could be delivered by 2030. So just like VDOT, we're also looking for opportunities to reduce the schedule. So one of the opportunities we're looking at is maybe starting partial acquisitions prior to final completion to move that schedule along. We're going to be seeking input from contractors through an industry review to see if maybe there's things that they can see that we haven't thought of that can move the schedule along. Another potential, but again, this would need a VDOT approval, is to advertise section 2 of our contract for BRT prior to the completion of VDOT work. And then finally, there are incentives, other projects to use, in this case, contract incentives that could compress the schedule. With that said, we still have ongoing risks to the project. So one of the big ones is right-of-way acquisition and relocation, utility coordination. As we've talked, there's many utilities on the corridor, the schedules for adjacent projects. I think Dan talked a little bit about this, but just if there's a delay on his, that obviously affects our project. Hazardous materials mitigation, that all has to be completed before we can actually do any of the construction. There's ongoing agency coordination. So as I said, the project goes all the way to Fort Belvoir, so we need to make sure we're talking to Fort Belvoir, the U.S. Army, VDOT in general, and for environmental document, Department of Historic Resources. And there's also ongoing private developments that are on the corridor that we need to just make sure we accommodate and coordinate with. So with that, I will now give the floor to Ricky to kind of go through a right-of-way process and acquisition.
Thank you, Vanessa. Please proceed. So the right-of-way acquisition process that we'll be following some of the FTA, we'll be following all of the FTA procedures and guidelines, as well as the VDOT process. As far as analyzing some of the property impacts, it should be understood that each property is unique and the impacts are evaluated on a case-by-case basis. So over here we have sort of a snapshot of the VDOT right-of-way manual that sort of outlines, the guide to the property owners. But essentially some of the property impacts that we'll be looking at and some of the options that are available to the people that are affected by the property or by the project are relocation assistance for residents. These are moving costs, relocation housing supplement, rental assistance for displaced tenants and owner occupants. This goes on for up to 42 months. So that's basically a differential between current rents that you may be paying and the new market rent that you would be relocated into. We would pay that for up to 42 months. Businesses and farms and other nonprofits would be eligible for moving cost expenses, relocation and property supplemental expenses, and reestablishment expenses. Again, more information can be found on this in the VDOT's Guide to Property Owners, and you can see the link below, which will be available. Next slide, Vanessa. So we've looked at this as a sort of a three-phased approach when looking at the right-of-way. Most of the right-of-way acquisition will be in Segment A there, or what we're calling Section 1, which is between Huntington Metro Station and Sherwood Hall Lane. Then there will be some other acquisition performed by the by VDOT in the Segment C there. And then Segment B as well, there will be some minor right-of-way acquisition that's necessary, but that will all be dealing with Fort Belvoir and Woodlawn. So, but the whole parcel acquisitions will be acquired by the county, and then most of the parcel acquisitions will be performed by the design builder as part of the design build award contract for Section 1. We're looking at the whole parcel acquisitions as sort of a rolling approach, and this was in order to make it a more manageable project and to streamline the process. So additionally, this would be in order to minimize the amount of times that we need to go to the Board of Supervisors for review and approval. Some of the strategies that we are looking at for the grouping of these would be looking at residential relocations taking priority. So any properties that have residences that have property owners or tenants that need to be relocated would be in the first group. Second group, we'd be looking at sites that have potential hazmat conditions that would be sort of have a different schedule or longer lead time in the schedule for cleanup. And then commercial relocations with multiple tenants would be sort of in third groups. We're looking at developing an acquisition and relocation plan for each group. and subsequently an overlapping schedule, or as we've stated, sort of a rolling group approach. The second group would generally start before the completion of the first group, and the third group would start before the completion of the second group. Beginning times of the second and third group depend on the progress of the status of the first, second group, and other project milestones. Next slide. So looking at a little bit at the right-of-way schedule, whole parcel acquisitions you can see here, which is sort of circled in the magenta outline there, is scheduled to start later this year. Currently, we are performing title work on a number of properties that we've identified as high priority for whole parcel acquisitions. Then we would be moving into the appraisal phase. And then after that, of course, we'll be reaching out. Well, we would be reaching out to property owners during the appraisal phase to let them know that they're going to be afforded to accompany them on the property inspection. But with that said, the design builder would then be taking over, after the whole parcel acquisitions, sometime in 2022 or 2023 for the parcel acquisitions, and we would be finishing up some of the whole parcel acquisitions at that time as well. Next slide, please. As you can see here, we're looking at, we're currently in the title report phase, and we're looking at some of the appraisals starting roughly in November or very late this year for the first group, which we've started to identify some of those properties. And then we'd be looking at the second group starting at roughly May of 2021, and the final group, the latest start date would be February 2022 to stay on schedule. We're looking at ways that we can accelerate that and move it up in the schedule, though. And then after that, I'm sorry.
Sorry, Tricky.
Yes, that's okay. And then one of the major milestones here would be, well, two things to talk about briefly are relocations would realistically start about the same time that the offer packages go out. Well, relocation agents would be working with property owners to help assist in reestablishment. But then you can see here the site demolition phase, which is also a critical piece we're looking at for approximately February or March of 2022 to start that process. And there are certain triggers that we'll talk more about that will explain why we're starting that 2022. Next slide, Vanessa. Some of the legal requirements that we'll be following will be the Uniform Relocation and Real Property Acquisition Policies Act of 1970 as amended. This is updated fairly regularly by Congress, VDOT Right-of-Way Manual of Instructions, FTA Circular 5010 1E, Federal Code 49 CFR Part 24, and then applicable laws, policies of Fairfax County, Virginia, and the Commonwealth. Next slide. So a little more about the acquisition process. Right now, we've started title reports. So this is to identify the landowners, any easements, encumbrances, or claims against the property. Sorry, my dog was barking. And this is necessary to basically establish who the rightful property owners are that we should be negotiating with as part of the process. The appraisal process would start with a letter of intent to the property owners to notify them that we would be completing an appraisal of their property, and this affords them the right to contact the appraiser to set up a time to meet with them to discuss the property and tell them anything they need to know. Once that's completed, we would start the appraisal review and approval process, which in some cases we have a contracted review appraiser. Additionally, it may come to the county for internal review, or in some cases go to the FTA as well for approval. And then we would prepare the offer based off of the appraisal. We would send that out to you as part of the negotiation process. At the same time, you would be receiving the title report, the appraisal, the offer letter, a notice, a 90-day notice to vacate, and you could begin negotiations. Then we would move into the settlement phase, in which the property management would be taken over by the county after hopefully successful negotiations. The county would manage any remaining tenants when necessary. And once the property is vacated, it would be the demo process will start. As a last resort, we would consider condemnation only if an impasse is reached with property owners. Meeting with the Board of Supervisors would be set up to discuss the next steps. Condemnation would be handled probably in groups. Next slide, please. So a general outline of the relocation process is tenants would be notified after property owners. We would complete a pre-acquisition report, interview, gather any information necessary to determine relocation benefits. Eligibility packages would then be prepared, and this would occur during the appraisal phase. Per the Uniform Act, we would also send out translators as necessary to help with communications during the appraisal process, or of course during the negotiation process. So this way that anything that's necessary to be communicated can be effectively communicated per law. So after they receive the notice of relocation eligibility, which would detail all of the benefits, the property owners would receive a 90-day notice to vacate. Once property is vacated, the demo process will be completed. Properties will be managed and maintained upon completion of demolition. Next slide, please. In the future, we're planning some more public information meetings. So far, we've had three information meetings on this project. We're looking at 30% design public information meeting sometime in the fall, in which we will have great information on the right-of-way impacts and acquisitions. We have had ongoing coordination with property owners and developers who have reached out to us based off of their various individual inquiries, and we will continue to do so as the project develops. Next slide. So we're anticipating that we will have our roll maps out sometime in mid-July, so this way that people can see what the right-of-way impacts will be since we've had some of our design changes. Public information will follow thereafter. Just sort of as a reminder, all of the whole parcel acquisitions and uneconomic remnants will be performed by the county, and they're all within Section 1. And then the parcel acquisitions will be performed a later date by the design builder. They're also within Section 1.
So I think that's all we had. And before Supervisor Lusk opens it up for questions, in case anyone wants to know, again, here's our website. You can see just if you type in Richmond Highway BRT, you'll be directed specifically to our page. If you have questions directly that you want to email the project team, it's very simple, dotbrt@fairfaxcounty.gov. And of course, the third option is, last option is always to just email us, send us in a mail or a postcard or whatever you'd like. We still take those, and there's someone there. So with that, we're gonna stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Vanessa and Rick. At this point, I will just open it up to Supervisor Lusk to go ahead and ask any questions that you may have before I start reading out the questions that are in our queue. And just a reminder for anyone that is watching, if you had any questions about the presentation, go ahead and put them in the Ask a Question section below, and I'm just going to start reading them out, and then I'll invite Dan back up. So with Dan, Vanessa, and Supervisor Lusk can go ahead and start to begin. the question and answer portion of the presentation. So right now, I'll just let Supervisor Lusk take the stage and ask any questions you may have.
Thank you also to Ricky and Vanessa for these very informative presentations. Would it be possible to go back to Ricky's slide number 22?
Yes. Give me 1 second. The presentation's lost, of course.
Oh, no. I think I can maybe still ask the question, but it might be helpful to see the slide.
Absolutely.
Maybe while we're waiting for it to come up, my question is really centered around the issue with regard to demolition of properties that have been acquired. One of the issues that I have, and I think I've made this point before, is concern about having buildings remain along the corridor in a vacant state. I believe that would not be conducive, for our future redevelopment of these properties, and just want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to expedite the demolition of those facilities. So the reason why I'm asking this question is really based on this slide. So I noted that you've got acquisition kind of overlapping with the point for site demolition. And then you can also see there's a little bit of time beyond before the demolition is completed. So just trying to get a sense of kind of what's the thought process here. I know we've talked before about it, but just want to make sure I'm still clear based on this graphic that we are really not going to be having properties sort of hanging out on the corridor for some extended period of time.
Ricky, can you?
So I'll just go ahead and invite Rick back up, but I will go ahead and remove the presentation from the queue.
Sure.
Yes, hi. Yes, and thank you for the question. So as a clarification, there is a couple of milestones that need to happen before we can actually do the actual demolition. We have to be in project engineering to do the demolition in order to be eligible for FDA funds for that portion of the project. In certain circumstances, we may be able to accelerate that, but that's on a case-by-case basis based on their approval. However, we would be working in the sort of in the background to get all of the approvals at the county level through land development services and such to work towards the demolition. And working with our partners, especially if there's environmental contamination, to complete all of those inspections that are necessary and get all of that reporting done as well. So we would be working towards that in any event to make sure that that time is reduced as much as possible.
Okay, and then just as a follow-up, just thinking out loud here, it certainly would be helpful if we could extend maybe leaseback options for some of the properties, assuming that the owners would like to stay longer. I think if we can keep them as occupied as long as possible, this will serve not having them become kind of an attractive nuisance along the corridor. So we've done a pretty decent job of removing a number of those over the past few years, and would not want this to kind of encourage or start to show that condition in the future.
Yes, and that's something that we're certainly looking at. Additionally, just as another point of clarification, and it's difficult to explain without the graph up there, but
Yeah.
Once the process starts, there's a long process that's involved in the actual negotiations that's important to understand that, even though that looks like it's almost a year and a half before the acquisition, when the acquisition starts to when the demo can start, for some time that's filled in with the title report, some of the background stuff that goes on with the appraisal. That's a few month process. And then there is a process of negotiation. So really from start to finish in the general right of way acquisition process, we're looking at anywhere from 8 to 11 months really before we expect to take control. So what you're seeing really is sometimes maybe only a 4 to 5 month window of where that property may be sitting vacant before we're able to demo the property. In cases where there is environmental contamination, that risk and that schedule risk could be elongated, but we haven't identified all of those properties yet, and some of that information we will not be able to have until we actually are able to inspect the property with the property owners.
Okay. No, I appreciate that clarification. And then the last point I'll make is I know that we are striving to shorten the timeline on the project, and I think for both the BRT and also for the widening, we should certainly continue to look for efficiencies in the delivery of the project so that we can, have this come online sooner. The thing that I'll just make a point again about is if we think about the Embark Richmond Highway plan, the idea is for us to start that as soon as possible. So really, from my standpoint, I think that the important thing is that we deliver both of these improvements in order for that to maybe jumpstart what will happen with Embark. So unfortunately, as I kind of see it, it's really going to create an issue the longer we extend the project out, because that means it's going to take us longer for the developers and others to enact the Embark Richmond Highway plan. So I think we need to be sensitive to that point and to continue looking for ways to compress the schedule and deliver this in a more expeditious manner. But I will say I stand ready to help in any way that I personally can, and I appreciate what work has been done on this project up to now. And I'll say lastly that as a person who was involved with the Embark Richmond Highway plan, I'm looking forward to really being able to build out the town center concepts that are proposed in it. And I really think it's going to, make our community so dramatically different than what it is today. So thank you, and I look forward to working with you going forward.
Thank you, Supervisor Lusk, for that, and thank you, Rick, for clarifying. At this point, I am going to go ahead and take Supervisor Lusk off of the screen so I can invite back Dan so we can start answering some of the questions that are in the queue. Just go ahead and put all the questions in the queue, and we'll just start with that. So the first question I have on here is about speed, and it is from Sonia. She's asking, a 45 miles per hour speed limit is dangerous for people who bike, walk, and need access to transit with the high rate of pedestrian fatalities in the corridor. Why not design the road for a 35 mile per hour speed limit? Would that be safe for all users? Then I will let you guys tackle this question.
Thanks, Kaylee. Dan, should I take? It's a team effort, right? So yes, we absolutely agree. That is something we're going to look at. It's on our minds, and obviously we'll work with our partners at VDOT to make sure that we can continue to do that. And I don't have a time frame, but Dan, maybe you have additional information.
It's a process that we're still working through with Fairfax County. There are several things to consider. You're correct. We're trying to make this a multimodal corridor with new cycle tracks and sidewalks and transit. We have to balance that with the fact that this is a national highway system route, the fact that this is a corridor of statewide significance, So those are just some of the factors we're considering as we continue to work through this with Fairfax County. I will say we are designing the project to 45 miles an hour, but that does not necessarily preclude us from lowering the speed limit in the future.
Thank you, Dan. And I think the next question is for you as well. And it is from Renee. Hi, Renee. So she asked, overhead utilities will restrict tree canopy and degrade the visual aesthetic. The cost is higher to bury these, but can you talk about what might be able to be done to have a future vision without wires above ground? So I'll let you take the stage on that, Dan.
This really comes down to a priority issue. It comes down to funding. We don't have full funding for the widening project at the moment, and BRT does not either. So we're working on filling those funding gaps. Undergrounding is significantly more expensive. I think the last time we looked at it, it was something like $45 million in order to do undergrounding. And while in the scheme of this project, that's not a huge amount, it's a large amount when it comes to transportation priorities.
Dan, I'd add that I think the 45 million is just for your section. So if you include, your section's 3 miles, I have another 4 miles to go. So we're almost to 100 million in time. So I know we've talked about some changes to overall our timing, but that what you've seen today doesn't include the additional effort, timing, design that would need to go into undergrounding. Did Kaylee get frozen? She might be, huh?
It looks like it.
Yeah.
So I guess one of the things I will say while Kaylee gets back up is if you can specify if your question is for both projects or a project specifically, that might be helpful as we go to answer.
Let's see, I think I can access the question. So while they come back online, we'll keep it going. What is left to complete the Fonzie phase?
Vanessa, before we go to that,
Sure.
One thing I will say is that the overhead utility, we're not basing our tree sizing based on whether the utilities are underground or overhead. A lot of that has to do more with the location, the offset from the actual roadway. So, and there was a note in that last comment about the tree canopy. So I do want to make that note.
That's a good point. We've worked both projects very hard to make sure we can get larger trees and have had to offset, which is one of the reasons, right, where we reduced the transit way by a foot so we can hold that offset that's needed for the road. So should we go to another question? Oh, there we go.
Back.
Hey.
Hey, everybody. Sorry for the technical difficulty. It looks like Kaylee got kicked. I am Matt Reniger. I am the supervisor's chief of staff. I usually do these things. I'm a little under the weather and looking a little informal, but I have been called in from the bullpen to bring us out here. So I'll just take it over, and I think Aaron's on the back end. We'll handle the video transitions. So the next question I see here in the queue, and I'm sorry because I had not been following the questions in the queue closely. Last site maps show properties in a work zone. Who can I contact about information and how? This is from Larry Jansen. So I'm not sure if that question is entirely clear, Larry. We might need some additional info on that one. So if you want to add your question back into the queue again with a little more info, I'd be happy to read it for you. Next question is from Alexis Glenn. Is FCDOT team still considering solutions for the first and last half mile of the BRT along North Kings Highway at the Huntington Metro Terminus? A dedicated bus line, even if it's just paint, and even if it's just during rush hour, would really help make BRT a success. And I'll let whoever take, I'm going to defer to you all on who takes what question.
That I think is me. So yes, Alexis, we are aware. One of the things we'll be doing, we'll have more information probably in the fall, is an improvement that we'll add to North Kings around the North Kings Shields Avenue area for everybody. The other thing I can tell you is I know our Department of Public Works and Environmental Services is working on lighting the rest of North Kings Highway, the corridor. I know for years the community's been working to make that happen. So I know that that's another project that's moving forward. There's a lot of traffic on North Kings Highway, so we're just looking for other various ways that we could just overall improve safety and efficiency. So thank you.
Okay. Next question is from John. And John, I'm really sorry. I'm probably going to get your name wrong here, but Bukowski. And John wants to know if the design right-of-way acquisition is fully funded, and if not, when those funding sources might be identified, and how will we avoid any schedule delays?
That's, I guess, for both of us, right? Dan, why don't you take your part and then I'll.
Okay. So for the widening project, the right-of-way phase is fully funded at this point. We're really looking for funds to close the gap on construction.
Actually, I was just thinking about it. We're probably not completely fully funded for right-of-way acquisition. We're obviously funded for all of engineering, design. I think our delta is a little bit less than 40%. So, right, like when you look at it at that level, we're probably 10 to 20% left on right-of-way, but the bulk of it for us is on construction, just like probably VDOT's.
Okay. The next question is for Dale, from Dale Rumberger, and it's just a point of clarification. So Dale's question is, as he understands it now, the revised scope and sequence for Section 3 won't begin until 2031. Can you all confirm that his understanding of that is correct?
Do you mean for a future expansion of BRT for section?
I think that's so I think he means like phase 3.
Phase 3. And I might need to get my lifeline here, Tom Bashadny. I don't know if you can.
Tom, you can throw something in the chat if you have an exact answer, and we can read that out. I don't know if any of you on the panel here are able to answer that, or we can wait for Tom to write something into the chat.
Well, while he does that, and he can correct me if I'm wrong, I'm going to say for right now, our board has not authorized us to look at Section 3 or Phase 3. That doesn't mean in the future it couldn't happen. So for right now, we're only working on Sections 1 and 2.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll look for Tom's response, and I will read that. I'll keep an eye out for it, and I will make sure that we get that out to everybody once we have it. The next is a question from Ernie Bridges. Ernie asked, I know there's a lot of wiggle room and timing to notify homeowners, but is there a specific date/timeline to begin to notify homeowners? So what's our launching off point for that?
That's a Ricky. Well, Dan, I guess that's for both of us. Go ahead first.
It is. So if you are in a property that's going to be slated for a full acquisition, that starts much earlier. We're trying to start that process this fall. So that would kind of be the earliest that you'd be notified. And I believe it's middle of next year if you're a property that's in a partial take. Mm-hmm. We're not going to be able, that's the start of the right-of-way process. We're not going to be able to notify everybody all at once. So that kind of lends itself to the wiggle room that Ernie's talking about.
Okay. Well, we are still waiting for Tom. Oh, here we go. Unfortunately, this is from Tom Bashadny in response to the other question. Unfortunately, there is currently no schedule for Phase 3 of the BRT at this point. So that's where we are right now. And I believe, and I'm going to apologize because our folks who are running this earlier are our transportation gurus. I believe that was sort of the purpose of this town hall too, is to get that information out, inform everybody, and make sure we have the experts here to provide you the background and the context for that. So your takeaway from that was correct to the person who asked that question. Just a couple more here in the queue. One of your slides talked of minimization to reduce impact on homeowners, specifically on Collard Street. Is this new information for us concerned on Collard? Also, when could we expect to see the first BRT bus? And that's from Sharon.
So let's take your first part. So you're at Collard Street. If you're on Collard, you know you're kind of on a grade. So that's what I mean. We're looking to kind of come in and work with just the design guidelines to make sure that we can save some homes that we wouldn't otherwise impact necessarily. So that's what we were finding the design for specifically for those reasons. In regards to your when you want to see a bus, 2030.
Great. Dan, anything to add from you on that one?
No.
No. Okay. All right. And it
That's
looks like the last one is at least partially related, but I want to make sure everyone's questions get asked. Is the planning of the realignment of Popkins Lane and Collard Street finalized or still being planned? And in parentheticals, they've added BRT here. And this is from Larry Dempsey.
It's pretty much planned. We're following the Embark comprehensive plan. So if you look at that, right now I'm bringing around Collard Street. There's really nothing that happens to it. It's more on the Popkins Lane side for the realignment. The problem is because we're widening the road, we need to bring in the tie-ins, right? So when you're coming down on your driveway, you don't have a huge bump. So that's what our issue is. We're changing the overall road. So we want to make sure we limit, again, the impacts and can tie in properly. So that's the only reason why sometimes we have kind of effects going down the street.
Okay. Well, that's every question that we have in the queue. I'm sure that there are more that have been generated, or maybe you might think of one later on. So someone from our staff right now is going to put our general email inbox for the Lead District Supervisor's office into the chat. Please feel free to reach out to us there, and we'll make sure to take your question, whether it's at the state or the county level, to the appropriate DOT and help you get an answer back. Again, really pleased that everyone could be with us. We really wanted to do this, or rather Supervisor Lusk really wanted to do it, just because of the changes in the schedule, making sure that we're getting information out to folks directly. If you're hearing things that you're concerned about, you know how the rumor mill turns, you know it's easy for information to get mismatched as it kind of plays a game of telephone across the county. So please feel comfortable to directly reach out to the supervisor's office. We'll talk to DOT for you. We'll get to the bottom of it. We'll find you an answer, and we'll come back. Again, sorry you guys got stuck with me at the end. I know Kaylee's a little bit more pleasant to look at, but appreciate your participation, and a really big thanks to all the staff who came to help us with this.
So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.